This week, among other things, television gave us two examples of people pretending to be other people. The first came on the last of the Not the 9 o'clock news on Monday, when Angela Rippon and Jan Leeming awarded points to Pamela Stevenson's uncannily sharp interpretations of them.
And the Moscow branch of the Mickey Mouse Club today held its annual general meeting.
Angela Rippon and Jan Leeming proving once again that we can never see ourselves as others see us. An example of imitation as a form of flattery came on Wednesday when the BBC One programme Elvis Lives lived up to its name by giving us a whole host of latter-day surrogate Elvises.
Adieu.
From imitations to images, and in particular the photographic images of the Observer's distinguished camera woman, Jane Bown, who, in the best of British, was seen photographing tigers, pandas, Arthur Askew, and J.R. For such a wizard with a lens, Miss Bown turned out to be a somewhat retiring lady and gave the briefest of answers to questions put to her over the ironing board. Earlier the same evening on ITV, the team that gave us that haunting film Kes, director Ken Loach, writer Barry Hines, photographer Chris Menges, came up with a social drama called The Gamekeeper, with some beautifully observed scenes of the changing countryside and the semi-feudal relationship that still exists between a gamekeeper and his employer. And finally, in the last of that remarkable series, Strange Ways, we saw some of its inmates celebrating Christmas with its message of cheer and goodwill towards all men. Well, later in the programme, I'll be talking to Jack Tinker, author of a new book, The Television Barons, about the granting of the forthcoming ITV franchises. First, though, a look at three of the week's programmes: The Merchant of Venice, the Everyman documentary on Nicaragua, and ITV's programme on the actress and pop singer Toyah Willcox. And with me to discuss these programmes are Michael Billington, theatre critic of The Guardian, Christopher Hitchens of The New Statesman, and social observer Peter York, associate editor of Harper's and Queen. The Merchant of Venice was the 14th in the BBC Shakespearean canon, the second produced by Jonathan Miller, and the first to be directed by Jack Gold, who you may remember was with us last week. It was a deliberately stylized production, with no bustling scenes set on location on the Rialto or elsewhere, as perhaps so much realism in television has conditioned us to expect. All the cast spoke in a variety of English voices, with the exception of Warren Mitchell as the Jewish moneylender Shylock, whose accent was noticeably Germanic. Here he is debating with Bassanio the money he has been asked to lend to the Christian Antonio. Michael Billington, what did you make of The Merchant of Venice?
I liked it very much, and I liked it partly because there were no bustling scenes on the Rialto. I think it's a terrible mistake, actually, to go out and film Shakespeare on location, because you always think of the tourist cafes around the corner or the television aerials they haven't got in the shot. Also, Shakespeare wasn't writing film scripts, he was writing plays, artificial structures. And I like the way Jack Gold did this. I like the space, I like the clarity of it. And I think he got it right. Shakespeare on television, I think, is about faces, voices, language, and all those came across perfectly, I thought, in this production. But I mean, on a much more positive note, I would also say I thought Warren Mitchell gave a startlingly good performance as Shylock. And I thought the great virtue of this production was that it made clear the background of prejudice and hatred that justified, or explained anyway, Shylock's revenge. I mean, I could give you countless examples of this, but just notice in that production the way the word Jew was always isolated as a pejorative. One marvellous moment I remember in the trial scene when Antonio is saying, what is harder than his Jewish heart? And Warren Mitchell just did a little cry of ah, as if to say, this is what I have to put up with all my life. I thought it made that racial background of the play immediately clear and apparent. Another example, I mean, that marvellous rendering, I thought, of Hath Not a Jew Eyes, which has become one of the terrible sort of hurdles in playing Shylock. Well, here you saw two Venetian bloods pinioning Shylock with their arms around his neck, and it became a sort of appalling joke until the moment when he got to, if you wrong us, will we not revenge? And you suddenly saw what Shylock was, a man who'd assumed a mask of jollity, but inside was burning to get his own back. I thought it was an excellent performance.
Christopher Hitchens, what did you think of The Merchant of Venice?
Well, I don't think that it needs either Jonathan Miller or Jack Gold to make Shylock a sympathetic character. I'm always lending money to people like Bassanio and Antonio, and I've always sympathized with him anyway. And I find that when one watches him, you're right to say that he's very, very well performed by Garnett. But I think Shakespeare liked him too. I mean, Shakespeare could see what Shylock could see, which is that Venetian Christianity was full of fools and gulls and frauds and bigots. And there's Shylock really taking advantage in a very intelligent way of it. What I think obscures that for the viewer in this case is that the play is so full of coincidence. It's more full of coincidence than Anthony Powell. And in fact, you look forward to Shylock like you look forward to Widmerpool and Anthony Powell. And the fact that the stage and the set has been cleared, there's no Venice, there's no background, there are no other people, it's all underground and subterranean, I think reduces the impact of the play of character and the play of interest and intelligence in the production. So to that extent, I think it doesn't quite deserve Michael's praise.
What did you think, Peter York?
Well, I don't have a preconception about the play because I've never seen it before and I've never read it right through. So my main interest was really to see what Shylock was like, because that is the bit one knows, that's the speech one's heard. And I actually found Warren Mitchell's accent very distracting because it was too my life for me. It was too much Marty Feldman's mother, and that it is a sort of standard comic accent. And so at certain points I started breaking out laughing when I shouldn't have. I thought it was a fine performance, but that distracted me utterly. Otherwise, I was just glad that it wasn't tricksy, that it wasn't a rethought. It seemed to me a fairly sort of standard production, albeit very expensive, and a nice dull watch if you've got a lot of time to spend.
Do you want to come back there,
I would
Michael?
love to come back to Christopher's point, actually, because, I mean, I don't quite agree with him that it doesn't need Jack Gold and Jonathan Miller to help Shylock along. Certainly, yes, we have a tradition in this century of playing Shylock as a sympathetic character. But don't forget, to Shakespeare, he wasn't that sympathetic. To the Elizabethans, usury was the prime cardinal sin, and Shylock was above all a usurer. And that, to Shakespeare, would have made him an extremely equivocal character. I thought it was a great plus, quite honestly, to have a Jewish actor playing it. I don't think I've ever seen it on the stage with an authentic Jewish actor, and I thought that was a great bonus in this production.
Let me ask you something else. Did you not get, as I slightly did, a sense that there was almost nobody else existing outside the characters we saw? There was no feeling. I'm not saying you have to see the Rialto, but there was no feeling of there really being anybody else there at all.
Well, I like that because I think the terrible mistake in Shakespeare on television, and it was a mistake I think the first batch of BBC Shakespeare's made, is to clutter the studio, either with settings. I mean, when they did Julius Caesar, you had a sort of massive reconstruction of the Forum. That's always a mistake. Or to fill it with rhubarbing extras. And I thought to focus on the principles was very intelligent. But can I just come back to another point? I think also it was an emotionally very precise production, and Jack Gold had very clearly thought the play through. I mean, for example, it was quite clear that both Portia and Antonio were desperately in love with Bassanio. And you know that famous moment when he has to give his ring in payment for Antonio's freedom after the trial. And that became an absolute crux in this production. He had to choose between his love, his homosexual affection for Antonio, and his love for his new wife, Portia. And I thought that kind of emotional accuracy and precision gave this production a lot of depth, quite honestly.
What did you think about the asides to the camera? I mean, these are normally asides to a live audience. You don't talk to a live audience like you talk to the camera, as anybody who's been on television knows. Mm-hmm. Did you think that came off?
Yes, because I think you've got to use the camera when you're doing Shakespeare. I mean, in the clip we actually saw Warren Mitchell, didn't we, telling us, the audience, what he thought about Antonio. Seems to be perfectly legitimate. I really did appreciate the way they did, A, this production, and B, the way the Jonathan Miller style seems to be evolving to clear the space and to give the language room to breathe.
Thank you very much. We'll turn now to Everyman on BBC One, which is a religious current affairs programme that deals with a wide variety of issues. This week it reported on the recent revolution and its aftermath in Nicaragua, the country that lies on the isthmus that joins North to South America. It showed how the revolution started when the money that should have gone to help the victims of the 1972 earthquake had found its way instead into the pockets of the ruling Somoza family. The interesting thing about the successful Sandinista opposition, the film claimed, was that it had had the support of many priests, and one of these, Father Cardinal, now the Minister of Culture, claimed that they were fulfilling Che Guevara's prophecy that once the church joined the social revolution of Latin America, it would be unstoppable. The turning point in the revolution came when Somoza's men shot an American news reporter as he lay on the ground. This was filmed by his own cameraman and shown on the network News in America. Shortly afterwards, the US government withdrew its aid.
The popular revulsion to the Somoza regime swelled the ranks of the Sandinistas. Demonstrations, lockouts and strikes from employers and workers alike developed into full-scale revolutionary activity, and the final push began on the 20th of May, 1979. By this time, the world's press and television had been attracted to the carnage. One crucial piece of reporting came when a cameraman filmed his own colleague, reporter Bill Stewart, being shot dead by one of Somoza's National Guard. As one Nicaraguan said bitterly afterwards, the Guardia shoots 20,000 Nicaraguans and nobody minds. They shoot one American and the whole world is up in arms. 35,000 people were estimated to have been killed in the revolution, and 100,000 injured. For those who lived through it, it was a bizarre time of extremes, heady excitement mixed with nightmare. The boundaries between heroism and cruelty, elation and terror, constantly shifting.
Christopher Hitchens, what did you think of this documentary, and in particular the claim that it was the church that had, for the first time, joined in a South American revolution, which would therefore make the whole social revolution in Latin America unstoppable?
Well, I'm myself an atheist, but I found the presentation of Ernesto Cardenal and his friends, colleagues, to be very moving up to a point, because it has been an amazing year for religion and revolution, on the one hand, in that once had Nicaragua, Poland, and Robert Mugabe, who one shouldn't forget was raised by the Catholic Church, and on the other hand for religion and conservatism, in that you've had Reagan and his interpretation of Christianity in the most reactionary sense, which is why I find the everyman presentation of religion in politics so thoroughly bland. What I do find fascinating, though, is the role of the press and television in accelerating or decelerating these events. In fact, that American cameraman did change American policy. You can't show that sort of thing to American audiences on primetime TV. But the whole Nicaraguan episode that led to that was started by the assassination of Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, who was the editor of the main paper in Managua. And his murder, as the main opponent of Somoza, began the whole impetus of the revolution. So it's not just that one American journalist is worth 10,000 Nicaraguans. So one American journalist is worth 10,000 Nicaraguan journalists. So there's nothing to be smug about being a journalist covering this kind of thing.
Michael Billington, what did you make of it?
I thought the programme was fascinating as far as it went. I mean, it did actually fill me in on a lot of the political, historical background. And I thought the actual picture of, say, a professor of philosophy engaging in a attempt to combat illiteracy, all those things, fascinating. Where it failed for me was in precisely this. It didn't grapple with the very subject it was meant to grapple with, the interaction of church and politics, as Christopher was implying. In the last 5 minutes, it told me things I wanted to know a lot more about, like the fact that the Sandinista youth are now apparently extremely critical of the church and talking about the bishops being divisive, that there is obviously a cooling of relations with the Vatican, who are not giving support to the political efforts of the Catholic Church in that country. That seemed to be what the programme actually should have been about. What are the sort of on-the-ground realities in a post-revolutionary situation when the Church and the state are supposedly working together? I thought it missed the real issue, quite honestly.
You don't think that, I mean, it did explain to those people who perhaps never heard of Nicaragua, it did give them some idea of what had been happening there.
I wouldn't deny that for a moment. I mean, my own knowledge was pretty hazy, you know, because I'd forgotten a lot of the details behind the headlines. I thought it was exemplary in telling you what had happened. But the programme was actually about church and state, and I thought it ducked, really, the realities of that.
Peter York, did you like it?
Yes, I did. I'm 2 jumps behind them. I don't know anything about Nicaragua and don't really care, but I thought it took me up the learning curve, as they say. It was a picture of people being simple and noble, which moves the heart. I did regret, almost, it was one of the few times that I regretted there weren't talking heads in the studio back there to ask questions. Not that I wanted people to be interrogated, as it were, at a point of documentary, because I thought that was quite adequate as far as it went. They were telling their story, and they were telling it, I thought, magnificently. But I wanted a bit more, not only about the relationship between church and state, but about, and I think this must be the thing that really concerns a European audience, the involvement of the Americans, because there must have been some, the involvement of the Cubans, there must have been some, the involvement of Moscow, all that, what is going to happen, because it isn't just about church and state, there's another dimension too, and even though it's a notionally religious documentary, for most people that comes across as cousin of Panorama, and that's how they see it, and those are the sorts of things they want to know.
What I'd like to add, if I could, to what I said before, is this. It's amazing how a natural disaster, if a government neglects it, can bring it down or bring it into disrepute. You probably remember Haile Selassie being done in because he'd neglected the famine, and the Italian government in terrible trouble now because of their turpitude about the earthquake and so forth. And I think they chose the right starting point. They got into it well with the awful business of the earthquake in Nicaragua. But they still couldn't put in any light or shade on the church.
Christopher Hitchens, thank you. Now to the burgeoning career of the ambitious young actress and pop singer Toyah Willcox, who at only 22 was the subject of ATV's Thursday documentary Toyah. She's already attracted attention as Miranda in Derek Jarman's production of The Tempest, and on television in Shoestring, and as the maid in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. As a pop singer with her band Toyah, she's had a record in the top 20. She's also been host of the late-night chat show Friday Night, Saturday Morning. Here she is at a photographic session expounding what she calls her philosophy.
I would like to become a commercial cult figure, because I believe if you are a cult performer, your following is so strong and so sort of religious that they're fans of yours the whole of your working life.
It's excellent.
That's the sort of audience I'm looking for, an obsessed audience.
Straighten your head again. Yeah.
If I wasn't successful, it would be purely because people don't like what I am. So what I'd do, I'd create a character. I'd try and create the perfect person and become it. I'd be prepared to do that if I completely failed. Because I believe if you can't beat them, join them, then corrupt them.
Peter York, you saw Toyah. What did you think of it?
Well, I've taken a dim view of Toyah since I first saw her in Derek Jarman's movie Jubilee, and that was confirmed and then some by this little documentary.
Not so little, 1 hour.
1 hour, well, I'll come back to that. Yes, it's a lot of exposure for the girl. Well, she basically struck me as a rather dull, what I call a hippie retread, who was being palmed off on people as being a punk person. And she's a sort of fifth form girl who's a casualty of David Bowie and his idea of expressing yourself. And she's just somebody who's lucked in, as they say, into what happened after punk. People think that she's what punks are, and that's very lucky for her. The really fascinating thing is that ATV should have chosen to give her a whole hour when she's neither particularly popular. I mean, lots of people don't know her, she doesn't sell lots of records. And this particular kind of film, which is just like an extended promo film, it's like a Top of the Pops clip blown up.
Do you think she's got talent?
I think she's a perfectly competent actress. She's not a musical person at all. My theory about this is really that she isn't popular, but that her real constituency, her market, is middle-brow, middle-aged media people who want something modern to enthuse about in a rather 1960s way that is basically safe and professional, because she does what people want on cue, and non-subversive. And I wonder they didn't have a session with her talking to an archbishop. It was a very old-fashioned kind of a programme, I thought.
Michael Billington, what did you think of Toyah?
I rather warmed to her, actually. I mean, she's got that squat, thuggish, fascinating presence, and she's obviously a fairly sharp, bright, articulate girl. I mean, I preferred her as a personality to Peter, I think. But, I mean, I thought the programme itself was dismal. I mean, as Peter said, it was exactly like a PR film. I mean, he would have made it exactly the same way. And it never caught the real sort of pathos of her situation, I would have thought. She says herself, doesn't she, that you've got to package yourself, and she's obviously doing that quite cannily and skillfully. But I mean, the process of packaging yourself is that in a couple of years' time, if you're not careful, you end up back on the shelf again because another product has come along to take your place. And it never really addressed itself to that issue. I just thought it was a bit of a lazy and in the end fairly empty programme. I mean, to rely as heavily as they did on another television programme, doing a sort of confrontation between Toyah meets the people, I thought that was lazy television, quite honestly.
As a theatre critic, what do you think of as an actress? One of the things they didn't show, of course, was her performance in Jekyll and Hyde. It was a BBC production. There was no reason why they shouldn't have shown it.
She's very good on stage. I saw her play this year, which they showed a bit of, called Sugar and Spice by Nigel Williams, and she is very sort of frightening on stage, actually. She certainly was in that play where she was brandishing a
Quite
broken...
frightening off it.
Well, in that play she was brandishing a broken bottle in a gentleman's genitalia, so therefore she was bound to look rather frightening. But I mean, she has talent, I think, as an actress, maybe more than a singer, I don't know.
Christopher?
Well, it's so difficult to say what you think of punk or any of its analogues without sounding about 55. Or, if you're talking about a woman, sounding ungallant, as I think Peter did, rather. I mean, she's quite a pretty girl. She's quite a gifted girl. But she's got nothing at all to say when she's not on the set. And I thought the agonizing bit was where they confront her with a headmaster who's so ignorant he doesn't know the meaning of the word born, as he employed it himself, with a goody-goody girl of her own age, and with an ageing trendy. And it is, I think Peter mentioned archbishops, it does show we've learned nothing since Mick Jagger was winched down to meet Ramsay, or Wilson had
Adam
breakfast.
Faith was winched down to meet Coggan.
Was it that, or Wilson had breakfast with the Beatles, or everyone feeling one must sort of get in touch with the young. And what that adds up to is terrific narcissism for the object of the programme, terrific self-importance, immense sort of portentous remarks that she made. She should just stick to doing her stuff. And what it will show is that punk is basically innocuous, pussycat stuff, and actually changes nothing and nobody.
What I don't think any of us could really say is how that programme would have hit people of 18, 19, 20.
Well, I don't think it would make them androgynous, as the Bowie comparison is supposed to suggest at all. I mean, actually, she restates, quite traditional female roles, and the fact she wishes she was a bloke is nothing to do with the case at all.
Last word from you, Peter.
Well, I'm sure she's a nice person. She seemed to be unmalicious. But basically, what I think's wrong is that she's stealing the thunder from a lot of people who did originate things, who did push the boat out, who aren't very good television material because they're uncomfortable, because they really are rather subversive.
Peter York, Michael Billington, Christopher Hitchens, thank you.